Hey everyone, this is Richard. Thanks for joining us for another episode of What's Spinning. Hope you guys are spinning some good tunes out there, some fun stuff. You know, I've been listening to something, I think it's just kind of fun to go back and listen to old things that you haven't heard in a while, and went and saw the movie Captain Marvel, and in that movie they have a scene where they play Kiss Me Deadly by Lita Ford, and that prompted me to pull out the album Lita that was released by Lita Ford in 1988, which has that song on it. It also has Close My Eyes Forever, the song she did with Ozzy Osbourne. And it's just been kind of a fun trip listening to that album. It's a different time for female rock and stuff. And if you're not familiar with Lita Ford, she also was the lead guitar player in the band with Joan Jett, the Runaways, back in the late 70s. And then in the 80s, she had kind of a solo career. So like I said, it was fun hearing that song in the movie. My kids have been playing the soundtrack to Captain Marvel. That led me to pulling out the album Lita. I recommend it. I think it's fun to pull out some stuff like that. I pulled out some other 80s music like Go-Go's and the EP by David Lee Roth, Crazy from the Heat. That's always a fun one because it's got Just a Gigolo and California Girls. Anyhow, today's episode, it marks the first episode of our record store series. And for this one, I spoke with Kate Siamro from Spinster Records in Dallas. And she came on, talked a little bit about her background and the influence that music has had in her life, and then talked about the album Transformer by Lou Reed. It was a good chat. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and jump into that. I think it cut down to about a 30-minute interview, so lots of good information in there, and a good talk about the Lou Reed album Transformer. And then I will catch back up with you at the end. Enjoy.
Kate Siamro. I was born in Toronto, Ontario, and my parents were total music junkies growing up. My dad was in a new wave band called Directive 17.
Oh, cool.
And they got a Juno, which is like Canadian Grammy, so
awesome.
That was cool.
Yeah.
And I grew up with a mom who loved Black Sabbath, loved
Cool.
New Order, loved all sorts of music, everything going from Gordon Lightfoot to Alanis Morissette, like just wild range. And
was there always music playing in the house?
Yes, always. Like, it's kind of, I didn't realize how cool it was until I'm older now. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I thought it was uncool. And now I'm like, oh no, my parents had really good taste. Yeah. And I just, and I always loved their music growing up, and I thought maybe I was just lame. Like I was the kid that was really into their parents' music, right. And all my friends were like, yeah, my parents' music sucks. And I don't know, I got really lucky, like in the jackpot of parents.
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, looking back, I have this funny memory where I'm in the car, and my dad was playing the Cramps. And it was the song, let's get, I don't know if you can cuss on here. Let's get effed up or fucked up. And he's playing it, and I started singing along, and I think that's when he realizes, like, oh, I can't play Cramps without my kid. Like, I gotta turn it down. Because I get so excited because there'd be a part where Lex would start saying, like, shouting like a chihuahua. And I would loved that part. Like, I was like 6 years old. Right. And I was like, that's so cool. And, but yeah, I mean, I got really lucky. And then my dad, once my mom had me, they were in their mid-30s. They weren't intending to have kids, but they ended up with kids. Right. So my dad buckled down and got a business job. And moved to we moved to California because the engineer boom was crazy in the 90s. And from there we just hopped around, and it's kind of cool because my dad became this businessman, but when I look back on my childhood and I see all these videos, he was kind of a hip dad.
It sounds like he did all right when he got into business.
Yeah, he did good. He's charismatic. California. I think he's a bass player. He has like bass demeanor. He's like tall, real tall guy, really cool, real low voice. Like, I think people take him really serious sometimes he says something.
When did you move from Toronto?
Oh God. I moved to California when I was 5.
Okay, so you didn't spend a lot of time there.
No, I went back a lot, though. So we would go back for winters and summers. Because all our family like grandparents are all there and everything. But I went to like 11 schools growing up.
Wow.
So we moved around a lot. And we lived all over Michigan. I lived in Michigan for a while.
Wow.
And I remember the White Stripes coming out. And I remember being a kid in the car, and I was like 8 years old, and they came on college radio. I remember hearing them. It was like my first rock band, like of my generation, not my parents, you know. And my mom
something you could call your own.
Yeah, and I remember my mom just kind of looked at me, and she was like, "These guys are gonna be really big." Like she was pointing at the radio. She's like, "These guys are gonna be really big," and I wanted to wear only red, white, and black.
Nice,
yeah. So. And my mom did that for me. So there's definitely a good picture period of me just in red, white, and black.
Awesome.
So, yeah, she was cool. But yeah, so getting into music, I mean, everything I listen to now, it's kind of lame. A lot of it came from my parents. And I wish I was cool and was like, went through the phase in high school where I was discovering it on my own. Like I found the Hip magazine, like the underground magazine. But anytime I'd discover something, I would show it to my mom, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I saw them at CBGB's in the 80s, and they were great." Or I remember getting The Cure, and my mom's like, "Oh, I went to every Cure concert."
Wow.
So I always felt like one-upped, you know? And I guess that's, I mean, better than your parents, you know, making you feel lame about the music you like.
Well, so did you become the person in your friend group kind of turning people on to stuff?
Yes. Yeah, I'd say
like, oh, yeah, I know all this stuff.
That, or they would say it was old people music. I feel, so I'm 25. I graduated 2011. When I was in high school, that whole emo thing was at its tip-top point. And I remember pulling up to my middle school with my mom, and she saw like a bunch of emo kids, and she's like, "Oh, cool, they're so goth." Like she thought it was like, she's like, "Oh, that kid has Johnny Thunder hair, like New York Dolls," and you know, and I didn't even know the New York Dolls then, and she was referencing all these like great things I understand now. But yeah, so I never really got into that music. And I remember when my mom would hear it, she would just be like, "Oh, it's so whiny. Like, it's the whiniest music." She's like, "Oh, this is so bad."
What were they listening to then that was like part of the emo scene?
Oh, it was like Fall Out Boy and all that stuff. It was all over TV. I mean, so that was at a prime when I was in high school. So that was a horrible prime of like punk music. And then you had rap, which was like Lil Wayne and crunk, and New Orleans had this crazy boom. And that's just what was in mainstream media, though. Right. I mean, there's other bands I've discovered since then that just weren't thrown in my face as much because I was in high school, so I was just
kind of the lower underground, like indie scene type stuff.
Yeah, and we got lucky because we lived in Oregon for a bit.
Oh yeah, I think that'd be a great scene.
Yeah, so like the late 90s and early 2000s, you have like Modest Mouse, you have the Dandy Warhols, you have kind of this like almost like 90s Brit crossover, but like hipper kind of like thing in Oregon happening. And so yeah, I came from that in high school to Texas. Oh. So that was just totally
culture shock there.
Culture shock leap. And I mean, I carried that music taste into here, listening to the Shins and all that, and that was what I thought was like my age of music. Yeah. And I still like it. I mean, I still get into it. So but as for like working at a record store now, I work at Spinster Records in Oak Cliff, and I noticed all the music I was raised on that I loved, that I thought it was uncool for liking in high school, is what I love now, and I think it's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, and there's kind of that.
It's cool.
Along with the resurgence of vinyl, right? People are getting into things that were originally released on vinyl, so that's kind of cool to see. And,
and you get like working at a record store too. You have like a lot of parents come in and they're with their teenagers and kids, and they're connecting through music. Yeah, and it's kind of bridging this gap, I guess, in age. Because I mean, everyone loves the Beatles. I don't really trust people if they say they don't like the Beatles. Come on, like, because I'll even have little kids come in and they know their favorite Beatle, and that's really cool. Because our parents, they're not even of like the Beatle generation per se. Like my parents, when they were young, they were in the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. So I mean, they were my age doing the same thing to their parents. So it's like that's almost 3 generations of, you know, gap. Yeah. So I really love, my favorite thing working at record stores, playing one of my favorite, you know, bands and then having a kid come up to me and telling me it sucks.
Oh.
And I love it so much because I have these memories of being in the car with my mom and her putting on Bob Dylan and me just screaming at like 8, telling her to turn it off.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, I like Bob Dylan, so it's kind of cool. Like, it's so raw. Like, kids will never hold back their opinion of what they think of music. And between Spinster and Texas Theater, my 2 favorite locations in Dallas. It's run by a guy named Roth, and he's super cool. But he brings a lot of great acts in, and Fred Armisen did his stand-up for drummers there recently.
Oh, yeah. He also went to Tulsa.
And I totally spaced and didn't get tickets, and it got sold out, and I was trying every inn, and I could not get in because it was so, like, sold. But,
by the time I saw he was in Tulsa, that was already sold out. Yeah. And did he stop by y'all's store, or did he stop by the Tulsa?
He did come into our Tulsa shop. Our Tulsa shop gets all the famous people, and the one in Oak Cliff does.
That's so
we
weird.
got Tyler, the Creator, in Oak Cliff.
That's cool.
We've had a few people. We had the 1975s.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we've had a few cool people in there, but like the Tulsa shop gets it like weekly.
Yeah.
There's always a famous person. We've had
weird.
Jack
It must be their
White.
location in Tulsa? Or?
Yeah, it's so in the grand scheme, if Tulsa was the map of Dallas, Brady Arts District is their Deep Ellum.
Okay.
So it's kind of where everyone goes to drink, have a good time, go to a show, get trashed.
Yeah.
And so that's where our shop is, which is really helpful because, you know, when people get there, Tulsa has a great underground scene. You can find some really cool bars.
Yeah.
But if you're not from there and you're just driving through like a band or a famous person who's flying into town, you don't really know where to go. So you're just wandering around Brady Arts District where you have your gig. And we're the only record store there.
Yeah.
So it works out very nicely. So
and the looking thing, I mean, it just looks like someplace you want to go into.
Yeah, it's warm. We're all really chatty, too. Like David, the gentleman who owns Spinster Records, David Grover, he is super nice, really outgoing, hyper extrovert. And I'm the same way, and I feel like he tracks that kind of employee. Yeah. You know? I feel like if you're introverted and you met David, you kind of panic. You'd be like, oh, this is a lot. So I feel like our staff, everyone on our staff is like really like hyper and social and very positive.
Yeah, I noticed y'all put out a lot of the videos and stuff like on Instagram and stuff like that. So I guess that helped.
I feel like sometimes we get stuff in and when we get it in, I get excited about it, but I'm alone because I work alone. And then I feel like, oh, I need to tell someone because it's so cool that this exists here. So I started using it more in that way. Yeah, so it's fun. It's the stuff you get in is really cool. I get very nostalgic a lot, obviously, because it's music. I mean, how can you not?
And one of the albums you picked out was Transformer by Lou Reed.
Yes. It was a hard decision. There's so many albums. I mean, I have a massive record collection.
Yeah. How big is that?
For me, okay, it could be bigger. Yeah. Let me think.
It could always be
probably
bigger.
Up to like 400.
All right.
350.
Cool.
And growing. And a lot of new wave. Probably if someone told me I was stuck on an island and can only have one genre, I'd probably go new wave.
Oh, it's so hard. I hate when someone asks me, like, what's your favorite band? I'm like, I can't do it. Or, you know, what's your favorite song? No, I can't. I can't pick one.
No, it's impossible. And I mean, and the reason I chose Transformer, because there were a lot of other ones, and I love David Bowie, and I was going to choose a Bowie album. And then I thought hard about it. I was like, wait, like Transformer is a Bowie album, and it includes Lou Reed, who's also one of my favorite musicians. So I just love it because it has great production. And I mean, a lot of people, when they look at an album and artist, they just think of the two together. They don't think of the backup squad. Right. Like everyone behind it, like who produced it, who wrote it, who's the sound engineer, and all that goes into it. So Transformer is like a great example of really good production with a musician who has an out-of-key voice like almost most of the album and very bizarre lyrics. And I think if it wasn't for Bowie, I don't think this album would have been even close to being great.
In fact, this was his second solo effort, right? He had self-titled release before this, I think. That
I think so. I know. So after Velvet Underground, he left them around like 1970, I want to say. And then he had a year, which is so tragic, and it's such a sad thought, but imagining it's like really uncomfortable. But I imagine like Lou Reed going to these great factory parties, and he's just getting wasted and having a great time making music, hanging out with Andy Warhol, meeting like Mick Jagger and all these famous people coming through, and you know, sleeping with men and women and everything. And then you know, leaves the Velvet Underground because all things change, and goes back home and lives with his parents for a year.
Oh, wow.
And is a typist for his dad, who has like I think like a tax accounting firm.
Oh, wow.
So just doing the polar opposite of what he was doing. And I just imagine that being such a crisis in your life, where you're this great musician.
Yeah.
And, you know, they didn't hit high on the charts, but they did still hit the charts.
Yeah.
And they were in the scene.
But
so
heavily influential, you know, after that. So
it's just kind of a funny thought. Like, this record has so much sad angst inside it. Because it's this guy who goes from being in a band where he is a key member. He's writing the music, and you know, just goes home, is living with his parents, like no money, like, you know, didn't make a lot of money off that gig. And then, you know, if it wasn't for David Bowie interjecting in his life and, you know, wanting to work with him.
Yeah, because Bowie was a huge fan of Velvet Underground,
yes,
right? And even
massive,
like was doing some of their songs live and stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like Bowie was just in full admiration of that, and then kind of hit it late. Like, I feel like he got there late to the party and was like, oh, wait, I can't do anything with Velvet Underground because they're broken up. But maybe I can get Lou Reed. And they're so opposite. Like, when you think of demeanor, I see Bowie as this very, like, intelligent, kind of elegant, glam man who is very in his skin and charismatic and likable. It's really hard not to like Bowie when you see him in interviews.
Right.
And he's very charming. And then you have Lou Reed, where he's one of the biggest assholes in interviews. Like, he actually would send other people to be in his place for interviews because he didn't think people would tell the difference. Like, he just has this like real just complete asshole, like
kind of rough.
Yeah, real rough around the edges. Just snarky, sarcastic, like just New York.
Yeah.
You know, I imagine him always having a cigarette, like never not having a cigarette, even like sleeping holding a cigarette. And those are just polar opposite personality types. And when you bring them together, you just get magic. Like, it's just a great album. I think Bowie was probably an admiration of Lou Reed because it's kind of everything he could never be. You know, like Bowie wouldn't be Bowie if he became Lou Reed.
Right.
But he could at least use Lou Reed to do what he would want musically, which is this album. So
yeah, it's funny you mention his voice because I remember this album. My dad had this in his collection, and so when I was in middle school, I'd be at home in the afternoons. I was like a latchkey kid, right? And got home, and so I'd go dig through my dad's records because he would never let me touch them if he was around. And so I remember pulling this one out and playing it, and at that time I was like, oh, the guy's voice. But you know, later in life I grew to appreciate it. But yeah, that was the first turn off. But I was like, oh, I like that song Wild Side.
Yeah, it's like his voice just like there's a bunch of voices. I mean, I remember my dad played a bit of Roxy music growing up, and I hated Roxy music. And I just had an aha moment one day. They were playing somewhere and I heard it and I was like, this is really good. And I always had this weird feel, like whenever I heard Roxy music, it always sounded like Forgetting Sarah Marshall whenever Jason Segel's trying to be Dracula. Yeah. Like, that's the voice I always heard in Roxy music, was this like Dracula-esque singer voice. And with Lou Reed, everything's so out of tune. It almost sounds like someone doing drunk karaoke in some parts of the album.
Well, what's funny is I re-listened to this after you picked it, and I was like, I haven't listened to that in a while. I'll pull it out, and took a listen, and I was thinking, you know, some of it with his voice and how it goes with the music, it's not too different from like in the 90s when Pavement was real big. Like a lot of their songs are kind of I could see them matching up pretty well. Yeah,
and I mean, it still was a sleeper album too. So when it came out, it did okay, but it wasn't like as big as you would think it would have been. So and I think a huge portion of that is just the esque-ness. Like, I feel if it came out in the 90s, it would have done better. It would have been along, like, there would have just been other musicians alongside that would have that similarity. And I mean, you get a mix of genre. There's so many, there's jazzy influences on the album. There's definitely some pop orchestra. Like, you have strings, you have tuba, you have, like, backup singers, like, a lot going on, and then you have Lou Reed, his lyrics, and his voice. So, as for album art, done by Mick Rock, who did all the greats of the 70s, I feel in my imagination, even though I wasn't there, I just imagine like David Bowie coming in with his crew. Like, he had his Thunder Thigh backup singers for a song. He had his sound engineer, who was Ken Scott. That blew my mind. So Ken Scott was the sound engineer. So you have the man who sound engineered with like the Beatles, Devo, Elton John, Pink Floyd, like all these greats. And, you know, here he is doing Lou Reed's. This guy who's living at his parents' house. His album in New York. So, I mean, Bowie came in with Dream Team. I mean, that's what shows through. Like, I don't think Lou Reed would have ever thought, oh, let me add strings to this song, and let me add a background noise of David Bowie going, ooh, 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 you know, like, just like these, like, little poops, you know? I think, like, all that stuff, it's the little things that count. It's that bass riff at the beginning of Walk on the Wild Side that's unforgettable and sampled. I mean, you think of A Tribe Called Quest, Can I Kick It? And that's what makes that... It's a great rap song. But, I mean, like, you hear that bass and you're, like, immediately taken back to that song. So, this album particularly didn't go super high on the charts. I feel like it did better in the UK because Bowie was behind it. And I feel like they were... When you think of like the early 70s, you have more bands in that kind of style over there. I mean, aside from that, whenever he passed away, I think 2013 is when he passed away, you have this boom commercially. Like, where I remember hearing Perfect Day on a video game commercial. And that, like, brought me back to that album because I remember hearing that song and being like, oh, that's my mom's Lou Reed song. So yeah, it was really interesting. Like, commercially, like in this decade, you find a lot of new music or even old music that you didn't even know existed through commercials or movies or TV shows. The singles released on this album, all three of them it's funny enough, like when I think of Lou Reed and his top 3 songs, it's all on Transformer, which would be Perfect Day, which is side 1, song 3. Walk on the Wild Side, which is side 1, song 5, and then side 2, song 7 is Satellite of Love, which I have a very fond place in my heart.
Do you?
Yes. It's such a like romantic, sad song.
I feel like that one too, at least when I listen to it, I hear the most Bowie influence on that song.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can hear his background vocals throughout it, which I didn't know for a long time was Bowie until I found out he produced the album, and then it all clicked. But yeah, I mean, Satellite of Love is so tragic sounding, but the orchestration, like the way it is orchestrated, it's a very Bowie song. My favorite line from that song is, I watched it for a little while, I like to watch things on TV. And it just, there's this like disdain in Lou Reed's voice. He just seems like he doesn't give a crap about anything. Like, it's a deep song, but he's trying to be cool, you know? It's just, and then immediately you just get the ba-ba-ba, like Bowie in the background and Lou Reed's rough Satellite of Love. I absolutely adore that song. I like that the 3 singles off it are all so different too.
Yeah, they really are. I never thought about that. But what I find interesting is kind of the lyrical content of the album. It touches on a lot of topics that maybe even today would be a little risky. I don't know.
I mean, they didn't, when Walk on the Wild Side hit it big, I think BBC Radio put it out, and they didn't even know that it was, there was a part about giving a blowjob in it. They didn't know giving head, that's what that meant. So it goes on the radio, and, you know, it has a very upbeat feel to it. So you don't usually catch it off the bat of him talking about being transgender or giving blowjobs or getting drugs, like all these very risque topics at the time. And I mean, even today, I feel like you don't hear too many songs about being transgender at all.
Yeah.
Like, in the way Lou Reed did it, he's a storyteller, and he sings Walk on the Wild Side. It's a very folky song, the way it's sung, because it's like telling the story of people he knew in the factory scene. But you can even look it up, and each person he sang about was a real person. So it's all like a true story, which is kind of this country folky-esque quality to his writing, which I don't know if that was inspired by Bob Dylan, maybe, because he was around New York in the time. Yeah, it's really cool. It's kind of, instead of him giving a backhand to the factory, you can see how much he really loved and appreciated the Velvet Underground and working with Andy Warhol. And I mean, he wrote the song Andy's Chest about the almost assassination of Andy Warhol. So yeah, you kind of have this folky element lyrically, and it's great when you hear it in the album and you really pay attention to the lyrics, because it is a catchy song. Walk on the Wild Side, that bass riff is just, you can't get it out of your head. And the do-do-do. Yeah, just that. Everything. It's and I mean, even nowadays, like there's the part where he says, and the colored girls go, do-do-do, you know, and you're like, oh my God. Like, you hear that lyric and you're like, oh, okay, whoa, that's being said. But he says it not almost in a racial way, but almost as a, like how people would refer to things. Like it's just so raw and so uncomfortably raw. And it's so honest that it's in your face, and it was a single on the radio in the early 70s. Like, just, it's crazy to think like that was playing on the radio. You know, you hit this era in the 80s where everything's like hyper censorship, and that was a song that was just A-okay.
The way it kind of toys around with, you know, gender and sexuality and stuff, which I guess Velvet Underground did some too, so far ahead of where things are even today.
And I mean, Lou Reed went both ways. So, I mean, I think it was cool for him just to be so open about it. It's definitely, if I think of like an album that expresses being transgender or experiencing like your first homosexual experience, I feel like Transformer does that. And even in the title, there's no song on the entire album called Transformer. Right. So I feel like the name behind the album kind of has that feeling to it too, like someone kind of going into their skin and going solo and expressing these like things that are pretty new, like to society, like things that are it's pretty wild.
There's a track that actually talks about...
Is it makeup?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, that's it. Yeah, and it actually uses the words like coming out of the closets and...
Yeah, it's pretty... It's kind of on the nose. You feel like it's talking about a woman and her makeup, and then you kind of listen a bit more and you're like, oh, I think this might be someone who's transgender or wanting to come out and be gay openly. Yeah. It's great because it's poetically put in there, and it's not thrown in your face, and it's done elegantly. And there's like, on that song Wake Up too, there's like a tuba in the background, which kind of throws me off because it almost feels like a song, like if you took away the lyrics, you feel like you'd hear it at a carnival or something. Like it just has this very kind of PG-13 carnival noise.
Well, you know, speaking of the tuba, what's the last Good Night...
Good Night, Ladies.
Yes. Yeah. The way that one starts, have you watched the show Schitt's Creek that's on?
No.
All the transition music in that show is just almost exactly like the start of that song, like and it's so out of place.
I thoroughly enjoy the bassist Herbie Flowers. He was also in T-Rex, so that's awesome. Yeah. I love T-Rex. You have that glam rock era is just the best. It's really funny. There's this great documentary, I think it's Classic Albums.
Oh yeah, that series was good.
Yeah, and they cover Transformer in it, and I highly suggest watching it because you have interviews from Bowie and Lou Reed and everyone who worked on the album. So you really get to see like the roots.
I need to find that one. I loved that series because they just dive into like track by track and what went into it. There's some good albums on that series. They did.
The other good one I saw recently on there was Rio. Duran Duran's Rio was on
Really?
there. Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure it was the Classic Albums collection. There's so many documentaries. Yeah. It's what I do in my spare time. I'll toss one on TV while I'm doing something else. But yeah, and it was really cool because during that Classic Albums documentary, they have a section with Herbie Flowers. him explaining the bass riff. Somehow, the way he did it, he was able to get 2 checks for it. Like, he was getting money, obviously, from doing this album. But he, like, scored a way to get 2 checks. He has this, throughout his interviews, he has this very, like, humble, like, doesn't know how good he is kind of at it. Like, he's not into himself. Like, I love it so much. He just seems so oblivious, but so talented.
He's just like, I'm just doing what I do.
He's like, I just found this bass lyric, you know? And, like, he just, like, up his sleeve had, like, one of the most catchy bass sounds, you know? And that's a great documentary. Aside from that, Mick Ronson, he worked on the album as well. He also worked with Bowie on multiple albums. But he's actually the guy who convinced them to have like an orchestra sound on Satellite of Love. Yeah. Which I think sometimes when I hear an album and I find out someone added something to it, I try to hear the song without it. Yeah. And it's really hard to listen to Satellite of Love without hearing strings. So I think he did a good job at taking it to that next level where it's like a composed album. Like it's very artistically well-rounded and jazzy, and I love ELO, so anything with strings. Like, I always hear violin. I can hear that in a song and always take it aside and enjoy it. So yeah, those layers, I think, really help it sound good. Bowie at that time, I feel like he was kind of poking his toe in a bunch of different people's work because he was also working with Iggy Pop and helped produce Lust for Life. One of my favorite things about the album, even though it wasn't a single off it, is that it starts on the song Vicious. If I didn't know any better and someone told me Vicious was from Velvet Underground, I'd believe them. Yeah. If I didn't know Transformer. It's a very just straight Lou Reed song. Yeah. It's super simple. It's just like Vicious. Like there's not a lot going on. You hear like a few background vocal tracks of him like kind of layered.
The guitar sound on that one is different than the rest of the album.
Yeah,
like it's more kind of just rock, kind of, you know, just out there.
It's very electric too. Yeah, and the lyrics are hilarious. Like, vicious, you hit me like a flower. You know, it's just, I don't know, it's snarky. It's all so snarky, and I love it. And if there was a movie, it's definitely like a getting revenge song. Yeah, like, it's just so good.
Oh, something we didn't hit is if you had to take this album and just pick your favorite song. Like, what would that be, and how does it speak to you?
Walk on the Wild Side I've known the longest. And Satellite of Love, I think, is really beautiful. But Perfect Day is such a sobering song. Like, when I hear Perfect Day, I feel like it's so much deeper. And I feel like it could be perceived deeper than any other song on the album. Perfect Day to me sounds like someone who's trying to commit suicide and you have someone next to you who's like making you feel okay about everything. I don't know, it just reminds me of like the first time, like if you're on a binge of drinking and smoking and that one day you wake up and you're completely sober and you're fine with it. And you feel good. Yeah. And I think that's like a very weird way to describe it, but I find it to be such a mature song, like just kind of a coming of age song too. Yeah. I've always thought it was really beautiful, and the more I take it apart and the more I've heard it as I've gotten older, I just appreciate it so much more. Because I remember hearing it in high school, because it was before Lou Reed died, because I remember wanting to see him live if I could. I remember hearing it then and, you know, being a high schooler and going to parties and stuff. And I thought it was such a, like, comforting song. Yeah. Like, you know.
It's great when a song can kind of move with you through life like that.
Yeah. It's definitely a song. I've felt differently about it as I've gotten older. Yeah. Everything about it. And it's such a sad song too. Like I can never imagine the word perfect being sung so sadly. It just sounds so distraught. Right. And it's really cool because this album to me, I hadn't gone to New York City until last year. So for me going to New York City, being a music lover, you know, and so many bands out of New York City admiring, to go there, like, this album was a big New York City album to me. Like, when I would hear it in high school, I was like, oh, that's what New York City sounds like. So the fact that Perfect Day, when he's talking about the zoo and everything, and then to walk through Central Park in the snow, like, on a really cold day, it really felt that. Like, I could feel, like, I was like, okay, I get this.
Yeah,
like, I
cool.
can get this songwriting. Like, I can see the mindset of this. Even another song on the album that really captured New York, obviously, is New York Telephone.
Oh, yeah.
Conversation. And that song's hilarious. I think in that classic album's documentary, there's a scene where they separated the lyrics from the tune, and it's so poor. like Bowie's singing so off key. Like, they're both singing really off key, like purposely.
They just kind of whatever.
It just sounds awful.
Yeah.
Like, it's worth listening to, but it's also, be warned, it will ruin the song for you. Anytime you hear the song, then it's all you can hear is the off keyness. I feel like it's a big I love you record to New York after going there, especially Manhattan, like Chelsea area, and then going up into Central Park. Do you have a specific song that you like the most?
Well, like you mentioned, Walk on the Wild Side, I like the feel of that one. Like, it's almost eerie to me. Like, it tells a story, but you can almost, when I put that one on, especially if I've got like headphones on, right, and listening to it, it's just, there's a certain feel to it that I can't really put into words, but it's just kind of
Larry, it's kind of like Satan giving you a handshake, saying, "Hey, come be with us, because we're all on the edge." It does kind of have that though. Like, everything he's listing, they're not all great experiences.
Right.
Like, you have people, like, he talks about someone dying in a car crash.
Yeah.
I
think with that one, it's like you can almost feel like it echoing down a dark alleyway or something.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's kind of the feeling I get from it.
Oh, that's very eerie. I like that though, but yeah, I mean, I feel like it lives up to its title then, Because I would not want to think of Wild Side in any other way. In total, okay, I feel like when some people come into Spinster and they ask me, like, what albums are necessary in their collection, I mean, a lot of people would say, like, Sgt. Pepper, and then, like, give the classic list. But I feel like Transformer really gets overlooked by Lou Reed because it is such a fantastic album. I feel like if you're into jazz, you can find jazzy influences in it. If you're into glam rock, you definitely have that in it. And if you love Bowie, I mean, a lot of people who love Bowie don't even know that he produced this album. So I feel like it's a real sleeper. But it's definitely well worth a listen. I feel like even if you don't like the first time, the third time you will love it. It takes a few times to like. It's kind of the same effect as Tom Waits and a few other artists. Yeah. Like, sometimes the first time you hear it, you're like, this is weird, and then you get into it. Definitely, my best suggestion is get this album, put it in your earbuds, and when you go to New York City, just like walk around and listen to it.
That's a great
I feel
idea.
like that's like the most amazing experience you could really have with it. It's an important album to me, and I'm really, really happy you actually brought me here to talk about it.
Thank you again for agreeing to do this. I know it's, like I said, we're just kicking off this record store series, so you get to be the first one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night, ladies. Ladies, good night. It's time.
Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed that chat with Kate Siamro from Spinster Records in Dallas, or more appropriately, Oak Cliff area of Dallas. Got that going now. We've got some interviews with record stores lined up. Also been starting, kind of building off of the interview we had with JJ Blue Flame or Brandon a few weeks ago, doing an artist series. And along those lines, recently recorded an interview with kind of a hero of mine from my high school and college days. Recorded that this past weekend, and I'll be putting that up next week, so keep an eye out for that. As far as anything new that's been coming in, it's been a little slow. I don't really have anything new to share, but, looking forward to some of the things coming out soon. That Teal album from Weezer is coming out for Record Store Day, and there's some other selections for Record Store Day coming out that'll be pretty exciting. Anything that you guys are looking forward to coming out, share it with us. Let us know. And any albums you want to discuss, let us know that as well. As always, you can interact with us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the name @SpinningPodcast. You can also send us email at podcast@wildhogrecords.com. So that's all I got for you this week. Keep an eye out for things on social media, like I said, and we'll talk to you later.